Good afternoon, class, and welcome to our second discussion. Our discussion today in general will be on the religion of Buddhism, and in particular on the philosophy of Nagarjuna. The text I'm going to be reading from is called World Religions Today by Esposito and others. And the page I'm going to be reading from is going to be page 364, and it's just going to be two uh, small paragraphs, but they have a lot of information in them. And so, just like the former discussion, this does not assume any former knowledge of the subject. Uh, Now, it is pretty far in the chapter as well, and the authors have provided many terms which they assume you'll be familiar with. But we're going to review a few terms. Now, the question for this discussion, I've written down a main question like last time and then three additional questions. The main question is what do you see the application of Nagarjuna's philosophy of Buddhism to be? Application of should let me read that again. What do you see the application of Nagarjuna's philosophy for Buddhism to be? So that's going to be the main question to discuss. And from those questions, I have three other ones sort of leading up to it that I'll share at the end. There is quite a bit of vocabulary here. The nice thing about this book is that it has key terms written on the margins, and then it defines those key terms. Now, you may choose to define a key term. Don't simply write the information that's already been provided to you, but put that in your own words or say something in addition to it. Also, I have defined some of the vocabulary, or I've included some of the vocabulary that we might not see as vocabulary, such as monk or laity. Those are common words. But again, recall the practice of hermeneutics. Um, we have a general word like monk, but you want to also become familiar with the particularity of it, right? So let's use the word priest that we used last week. So if you use the word priest and then you hear the word Eucharist, you might imagine one thing, whereas if you hear the word priest and then you hear the word Vedic, you would imagine something else. And if you hear the word priest and then you hear Ark of the Covenant, you would imagine a third different thing from those former two. And that's important. So when I write the word monk or laity, give me a particular definition of what that means. And that's much like the word priest, that's going to be particular to the context. So I don't just want a general definition of what this is. I want the particularity if you choose to define that. So some of the words to be familiar with: Madhyamaka, Mahayana, Buddha, Prajnaparamita, Theravadan, Arhat, interdependence. Now that's a word that's a general word, but what does it mean in this particular context for Nagarjuna? Laity, monks, enlightenment, again in this particular context, scholasticism, Nagarjuna, nirvana, samsara, shunya, means empty, but what does empty mean, right? Don't just say shunya means empty, but what does empty mean for Nagarjuna? Transcend, meditation, scholastic categories, human construct. So before comprehending this passage in its entirety, those words are essential to know in the particular passage. Let me go ahead and read it. So it's the beginning of 364. You can follow along if you have it. The title is the Madhyamaka, and it's just those two paragraphs. Among the earliest texts expressing Mahayana ideas are those called the Perfection of Wisdom, Prajnaparamita. In these texts, comments attributed to the Buddha or notable monks poke fun at the Theravadan Arhats and seek to undermine their scholasticism. More importantly, however, the Prajnaparamita text represents a search for the ultimate truth behind the words of the oldest Buddhist scripture. Since Mahayana thought emphasizes interdependence, its exponents saw the Theravadins focus on the individual's pursuit of nirvana as selfish, and therefore ignorant of the Buddha's highest teaching. Most Mahayana exponents held that the laity, as well as monks, could potentially attain enlightenment. Paragraph 2. Opposition to the Theravadins coalesced in the writings of the monk Nagarjuna, one of India's greatest philosophers and founder of the Madhyamaka school. Nagarjuna developed a method that reduces all assertions to arbitrary propositions. He argued that all language is conventional and that all classifications set up by language are mere constructs. In other words, language is samsaric. Using it uncritically to understand reality inevitably warps the mind with samsara's desires and ignorance. In one of the most courageous explorations in the history of religions, even Buddhist terms like nirvana and samsara, Nagarjuna argued, are mere words. It is through understanding how humans construct reality arbitrarily, positing a self and then a world of things, separate from it, that one reaches a core realization that reality is empty, or shunya, of anything the mind can construe. Through this insight, one can see into all illusions and desires, become free from attachments, and find release from the cycle of rebirths. Nagarjuna's aim was to clear away all false assumptions and even the subtle attachment to language and scholastic categories, thus opening the way to Buddhist meditation practices that transcend words in order to reach true refuge and final enlightenment. And this is where the section ends. So, my question, I'll go ahead and repeat it, the question for discussion. What do you see the application of Nagarjuna's philosophy for Buddhism to be? Now, in order to answer that question, I also had three sort of additional questions that may help. So the first question to ask before trying to answer that question: what was the Buddha's highest teaching, according to Nagarjuna? Question 2. What does interdependence mean philosophically for Nagarjuna? And finally, what does attachment to language mean for Nagarjuna, and how does this relate to the concept of anatman, or the Buddhist concept of no self, anatman being the negation of the term atman? So I hope this helps to provoke discussion. Feel free in the discussion to define any one of the vocabulary words that I mentioned and will mention on the list on Canvas. Feel free to provide answers to the main question or to any one of the questions leading up to the main question. So I hope this helps, and I look forward to reading what you post in the discussion. Take care.